begin the discussion today by asking Elizabeth to, there are three couples at the center of this book, Love and Marriage in Mumbai, and I thought she should be the one to introduce you to these three couples.
Hi everybody, can you hear me okay? Yeah? So I began this book back in 2008 when I first moved to Mumbai. I came as a young reporter and started working at Forbes India magazine, which had just launched in India at the time. So it's really where I began my journalism career. And while I was working as a journalist at a business magazine, which to be honest, business wasn't my top interest, but I was doing it and learning a lot. And at the time, like many Ferrangis, I ended up living with a number of Indian couples. And as I did, those couples started telling me stories about their lives and about their marriages. And through their marriages and through their lives, I learned so much about the city, about the country. And I began asking them more questions. And I think I also had a personal interest in hearing those stories, in part because I moved to Mumbai after my own father's third divorce. And so I had a lot of questions about why marriages work or fail anywhere in the world, and what makes for a successful marriage and what makes for one that falls apart. And so out of all the couples I met, three in particular really stood out to me. And from the time I met them in 2008 until now, 10 years later, I kept in touch with them, and at first started just asking them questions, and then over time, just informally, and then over time began to interview them about their marriages and their lives. So the book follows three couples. There is Maya and Veer, who are in their 30s and 40s, and they have a love marriage. It's perhaps a common story for you. They elope against the wishes of her parents. They run away to Jaipur in the dark of night and get married. And the story really follows what happens after that. And so for all of these stories, I was interested in not in the big, romance that comes before marriage and the love stories we all hear about in Hollywood or Bollywood, but I was really interested in what comes afterwards, what comes after a marriage, and what are the difficult realities of that we often, as a society, whether it's in the US or in India, don't talk about. So that's the first couple. The second, Ashok and Parvati, are much younger. They're a student and a journalist. And they're both Hindu, Tambrams. And Parvati was in love with a Catholic boy, but her father wouldn't let her marry him. So ultimately she gives in and she marries Ashok instead, who she meets on matrimony.com. And their story follows how she sort of makes peace with that, and then how she learns to live with this person that she did not want to marry. And the third couple is much older. Their names are Shahzad and Sabina, and they are a Muslim couple from a very conservative community in South Bombay. And their story actually revolves around their inability to have a child. Shahzad finds out that he's sterile and desperately wants to have a child, but he can't. And I think I was interested in this story because we often hear stories about women who desperately want a kid. But in this case, it was the man, and his wife Sabina was quite cool about it and telling him, it'll be all right. But especially in their community, it was a tremendous deal to not be able to have children, and also there were rules against adopting. And so their story follows them trying to make peace with the fact that they're not going to have a child, and that they're not able to adopt, and that they're going to have to live their marriage without it.
Okay, so I thought maybe it would be nice to break up my questions with her reading sections from the book. So would you like to introduce us to these three couples through the first couple?
Sure. So the first section I'll read to you, very short, is Maya and Veer, which, to remind you, is the love marriage that eloped against her parents' wishes. Okay. In Mumbai, people say the monsoons make everyone fall in love. But this year, the rains are late, and the June nights are hot. So are tempers. Maya and Veer fight in the early mornings inside the bedroom of their 11th floor apartment in a colony of concrete apartment buildings in a far north suburb of the city. One morning, they fight so loudly it agitates 4-year-old Janu, who is playing with his toys in the bedroom down the hall. He pushes the door open to see his father, in dress pants and no shirt, shout and point a finger at Maya, who is seated on their low bed. "Do not raise your voice with my mother," Janu says in his grown-up way of speaking. "I do not like that. Say you're sorry." "My superhero," thinks Maya. To her, Janu looks every bit the part, even though he is so little, with his dimpled chin and gelled hair combed off to one side, a single lock falling onto his forehead. Maya once thought Veer also looked like a superhero, with his glossy hair, open face, and irresistible smile. She didn't even mind his 6 toes or his lazy eye, which he said were signs of extra specialness and good fortune. "I'm sorry," says Veer, not looking at Maya as he gathers Janu up in his arms. In the days that follow, Veer and Maya hold their tempers in check. On cooler days, it is easier. And on a Sunday morning, not long after, when several fragile clouds arrive to mercifully block out the sun, Veer surprises his wife and tells her he won't go to work that Sunday. Ordinarily, Veer spends Sundays, as he does every day, working long hours at the family aluminum foil business. After he leaves, Maya and Janu often board the local train to go to Crossword, a chain bookstore Maya loves for its fiction and its coffee shop, and Janu for its toys. The shopkeepers let Janu play on the floor for hours while Maya sits hunched over a book, often by Rumi or Haruki Murakami. They will do anything for the attractive mother with the big, kohl-rimmed eyes and petite but curvy figure. "Madam," they whisper to each other, "looks just like a movie star." "Let's go to Crossword, Maya," Veer says now, using his pet ink for her, which he seldom does these days. "I'll come along this time." "If you are a stupid woman," Maya thinks, you'd say, "Well, at least he's around, Baba." But she knows he only wants to come for Janu. "Okay," she says, and gathers up her purse and Janu's backpack and checks that she has both her phones. A text from Sue Ball pops up on her screen. She reads it and then quickly puts her phone away. At the sight of Subbal's name, her mind often wanders to that first day they spent at the local beach. The beach in a quiet seaside town is just 30 minutes away by auto rickshaw, but it feels a world apart from the city's pollution and chaos and noise. It is nothing like her frenetic suburb, once a small village and now one of the city's most congested areas. But most of Mumbai's suburbs are like this, officially a part of the city, but just as noisy and crowded as the town. Within minutes along the drive to the beach, by contrast, the roads become slow and winding. Along the route are small, quiet rivers where local people fish and young boys swim. And at the end of the road stands a grove of trees, which opens up onto a magical seaside hotel, whitewashed and sprawling and encompassed by green. The seaside hotel is their place. It is where Subal tried to steal a kiss in December when there was a mild breeze. They ate from the breakfast buffet and sat talking for more than an hour beside the pool. The water was a clear, still blue, and the palm tree fronds hung over them. Maya found herself drawing lines on his palms. They both wanted something, but did nothing. Then she and Subal had gone back again in May. May was the Big Bang, or so they called it. The day when the energy and tension between them led to a kind of explosion, everything out in the open at last. "Come on, Mayu," Veer says, and Maya refocuses on her husband, who is holding open the front door. He stands next to a colorful lettered sign that reads, "Happy Star." It is the name Maya gave their home when they moved in.
That's really, really lovely. That's the opening of the book, and you can see how simply she weaves together a portrait of a marriage, going through a rough spot, and the geography of Mumbai, and just very simple language, just has this whole picture. So you talked about having found these couples by staying with them when you first arrived in the city. So what if, I imagine you stayed with a lot of young couples and families when you came. What about these 3 particular couples set them apart for you?
Well, I lived in Mumbai initially from 2008 to 2010, and then I left and went back to the United States for a while and worked as a newspaper, magazine, and then TV journalist. And the entire time I was away, there were 3 couples whom I met whose stories I couldn't get out of my head. And I think often in journalism, we say we work, really methodically, but in part it's also just gut instinct. And I think in hindsight, the reason that these 3 couples stuck with me is because they were both romantic and they were also rule breakers. And so I think one thing that I noticed the longer I kept coming back to India and living here was just how many people were trying to break the rules in their relationships, whether those rules were set by their community or their parents or their neighbors or their in-laws, and trying to really test the boundaries of what was possible, and that young people obviously had very different ideas about how to pursue relationships than maybe their parents did. And obviously in the scene I just read to you, Maya is exploring having an affair with another man, and that was something that I didn't really see represented in the newspaper or in the magazine. It wasn't something I heard about, that Indian women were having affairs, and so I think to me it was important to tell the stories of the way that people are testing the boundaries and people are experimenting. And I think also I was just originally attracted to them because, as I said, they were romantics, and I came from a place in the United States where I felt like maybe that was naively, I thought that was something that was missing, the over-the-top, showy displays of affection that you often see in Bollywood. As a young girl watching Bollywood films, I was really attracted to that, and I thought maybe I could learn.
Was it hard not to have a favorite among these 3 couples?
I think that my allegiances to each of them were shifting as time went on, and the way I reported this, I would spend a month at a time living with each of the couples, but there were times when something would be going on with the other couple across town, so I would race over in a rickshaw and then a taxi and train or whatever was required to get over there because something dramatic was happening with them. But yeah, I think it was hard also not to take sides, because there were a lot of times, for example, with Maya and Veer, who you just heard about, that Veer was never coming home from work and that Maya was desperately lonely, and I would hear her and see her be so distraught because her husband wasn't providing her with companionship. And he really felt that financial support was enough, but she said, no, I want more. I want you to be around. I want to have conversations with you. And so, there was a time when I sort of felt like, oh geez, I'm becoming biased against Veer, but then I would spend time with Veer and talk to him and hear his side of things. And of course, as journalists, it's important to not take sides, or to at least ask as many thoughtful questions as humanly possible to understand where everyone's coming from.
You have amazing access to their intimate lives. You have access to their WhatsApp conversations, things like that, or texts that are exchanged not just between the husband and wife, but between lovers and things like that. And so, what I kept wondering is do you think that because you were a foreigner, it was easier for them to open up to you because you were outside the family, you were outside the social circle, that they found confiding in you, was easier, and vice versa? Did you find that it was easier for you to ask them, incredibly intimate personal questions because they weren't from your sort of social context?
Yeah, I think especially when I first arrived in India, I made a lot of mistakes. Being a foreigner who didn't know how to behave, how to even dress, and certainly I'm sure the questions I asked in the beginning were improper. But yeah, I think it comes with tremendous privilege to be here as a foreigner and have people take you into their homes and be willing to talk to me. And yeah, I do think at times people shared things they might not otherwise because they knew that I was coming to it without judgment, that perhaps people in their community might have. There were certainly things like Shahzad being unable to have a child that he wanted to talk about with his community and his friends and his wife and his family, but they didn't want to talk about it with him. So my experience was that when I started asking him about this, then the floodgates opened. So I would say, okay, we have an hour scheduled for our interview today, and then 4 hours later, he was sort of like still talking and wanted to tell me more and more and more. So I think in part it was just talking about things that maybe people wanted to talk about that hadn't.
Why don't you read your section about, I think that those are among the most
Okay, this is the beginning of Shahzad and Sabina's story, so you're really getting introduced to them. Shahzad and Sabina met in a drafty room on a bitter cold day in December. It was a good year for India, the year the country won the Cricket World Cup. It was the year the bandit queen surrendered on her own terms from a life of crime, laying down her rifle before a portrait of the goddess Durga. It was just after the golden age of Indian cinema had ended and Bollywood had become fixated on news stories, big money, and assured commercial success. Coolie, starring the dark and brooding Amitabh Bachchan, was the year's runaway hit. When Bachchan punctured his intestines filming a fight scene, the country prayed for his recovery. The high drama and romance of the silver screen regularly spilled onto daily life. By the time Shahzad and Sabina met, Bachchan had recovered. Sabina wore a deep purple dress, the color of a blooming iris flower, and a cloud-colored dupatta wrapped around her face. When Shahzad looked at her, she did not look back. Shyness was expected from a prospective bride. Several women pulled down Sabina's scarf so that he could see her better. He could tell just how beautiful she was, like a movie star, just as his family had told him. Both families stood watching and waiting for his answer. Still, he worried and wondered what to do. He did not feel ready to get married, though everything in his life, and in Sabina's, had led up to this moment. Shahzad had been born the year Mughal-e-Azam came out, a film so popular it ran in theaters for 75 weeks, what everyone called a diamond jubilee, and then it ran for 75 weeks more. His father named him after the main character, who was a Shahzad or prince, and whom Shahzad would not grow up to resemble. Instead, he was born a frail baby and grew into a scrawny boy with nervous demeanor, bright eyes, big teeth, and a prominent nose. The wrong features stood out from his face. In the film, the prince falls in love with a magnetic court dancer against the wishes of his father, an all-powerful Muslim Mughal king. Their forbidden love affair sets off an epic battle between father and son. As Shahzad got older, people would joke, "Is your life story the same as the movie?" Shahzad always answered them seriously. "Yes, my father and I are divided," he'd say, "but not like this." They were not divided over a woman, and they were not royalty. They certainly were not Mughals, the Muslim emperors who'd once ruled India before the British routed them and the Hindu kings. Today, Muslims like them were in the minority, just 12% or so of the country, and they held little power. And Shahzad and his father's war was not an epic one, complete with thousands of troops, horses, and camels. Still, Shahzad felt that his father had waged some kind of battle against him since birth, one he did not quite understand. During childhood, Shahzad often fell sick. When his mother asked his father for money for a doctor, his father would shout, eyes flaring, until she did not ask him anymore. Instead, Shahzad's mother found resourceful ways to care for her young son. When Shahzad was 4 and came down with a heavy fever, his mother took him crying to the dargah across the street and placed him on the cool white marble and demanded of the saint buried there, "You are going to cure him. You pray to Allah that he's cured very soon." Before long, Shahzad stopped crying and his fever subsided. But Shahzad did not remember much of that. The first time he remembered realizing that his father did not care about him was when he contracted mumps at age 16. First, his throat began to hurt. Then his Adam's apple, bulging, seemed to grow larger and larger, and next, his testes, still an unknown body part, also swelled. The viral infection grew more serious, and it had everyone concerned except Shahzad's father. It was Shahzad's uncle who ultimately took Shahzad to the doctor. People whispered that Shahzad must have caught mumps somewhere. But the real reason he contracted the infection was, he thought, because he wasn't being looked after properly. Even the neighbors knew Shahzad's father, with his hard face, unkempt hair, and sad, distant eyes, was friendly enough outside the home, but cruel to his family. They knew he was especially punishing to Shahzad, who was born frail and weak, the opposite of his namesake warrior prince. And so this really sets up the reason that Shahzad will grow up to be sterile, related to the mumps that he had as a child.
So there you are, sort of weaving together his memories of his childhood. You've obviously interviewed his mother, in that. And in general, the book shifts a lot. Sometimes you're in the wife's point of view, sometimes you're in the husband's point of view, sometimes in someone from the extended family. But was there one perspective in the book that you felt was the most difficult to sort of identify with, and was there another that was sort of the most rewarding to explore?
Yeah, I think it was really hard for me to identify with Sabina, who is Shahzad's wife, who's in her 60s, elderly-ish Muslim woman who, from the start, first of all, kind of thought my project was ridiculous. And so I would try to explain to her why I thought it was important to hear about our marriage, and she was like, you don't need to hear about that, it's stupid. And just sort of, I think, was a hard nut to crack. And I think it was also difficult because Shahzad didn't want me talking to his wife alone without him there. He insisted on trying to be the translator for our conversations, which was problematic for obvious reasons. I did not want to hear from Sabina through Shahzad's filter. She speaks English, but not perfectly, and my needs a lot of work as well. So most of the interviews that I did were almost entirely in English. So I instead worked through a lot of different translators with Sabina, but in general, it was hard to access her and hard to know what was really going on, and I think it took a lot of times of coming back to her and asking her the same questions again and again to know what she was really thinking and feeling.
Did you have any breakthrough at any point with her?
Yeah, I think it was actually on my last night with her. We were watching Mumbai, which I mentioned here was a movie that sort of kind of shadowed both her and Shahzad's life, because Shahzad was named after the prince, and because Sabina, everyone said, looked like Madhubala. So both of them had an attachment to Mumbai. They both loved the movie, and they hadn't watched it in years. And then I'd been asking them so much about it that Shahzad said, well, I'll just go get the DVD from the market. And they sat down and watched it together. And I think them watching the movie really triggered a lot of feelings that both he and she had. And afterwards, we had a long conversation, Sabina and I learned a lot more about how she felt about the marriage. And she, by the end, was very honest. I mean, she has this saying that I continuously think about, which is like, marriage is like a ladu. If you eat it, you'll cry. If you don't, you'll also cry. So she was not pulling any punches about how she saw marriage, and she was very realistic about it, that there were disappointments in her life, but she sort of like dealt with them head on. So yeah, I think in many cases, watching films together, listening to songs, going over their emails with them if they were willing to share them, or some of them shared journal entries or text messages, that often helps, because there's so much we don't remember as people, and I think those pieces really help to trigger memories.
Yes, you often write about the influence of Bollywood on their ideas and expectations and disappointments, but another theme that goes through the book is the influence of faith, and I think, obviously Sabina was a deeply devout Muslim, but also the ways in which certain, like, Hindu stories influence the way people think about love and marriage and courtship.
Well, Maya actually, she was very attached to the story of Krishna and Radha, and she saw herself as a sort of Radha character who was like continuously pining for Veer, and like, yes, she got to marry him, but while they were married, he was still in love with someone from his past, and she could never really get his attention. I saw her like continuously turn back to that story for guidance. I think I saw that with a lot of people, is that they had particular stories that they sort of went back to to think about how to behave.
I was interested also in ways, since you were interviewing sometimes their extended families, how did they think about what you were doing? I mean, how did you overcome resistance? I imagine there was often resistance from the extended families, or when you didn't have such a close relationship.
I was grateful that some of the extended family did not live in Mumbai, because I think I would have had a much harder time. Though I did interview them when they came into town, but there was at least that remove. Because I did spend an enormous amount of time with these couples over time, and I'm not sure all in-laws would have been happy about that. Shahzad's mother, for example, I think if she not hated me, but definitely distrusted me, didn't want me coming in the house, and so it was sort of a long charm offensive to gain her permission to enter. And then once I did get permission to stay with Shahzad and Sabina, because I sort of said, I don't want to do this project if I'm just coming in and doing interviews and leaving. Like, I really want to show like the reality of marriage, so I would want to live with you. And if that's not possible, then that's okay. I'll move on to a different couple who's more willing to share. But Shahzad and Sabina both wanted me to come, but his mother didn't. And I think she one day, I don't know what changed her mind, but she finally said, okay, come. And Shahzad said, well, you're not going to get permission to come in again, so you just have to not leave for this whole month. So I did not leave, and I just stayed there for, because I was terrified that if I left the house, I wouldn't be able to enter again. And by the end, she and I, had conversations and we were fine, but that was difficulty.
Was it difficult to keep yourself out of the narrative, to keep it out of the way, so that you weren't being dragged in and asked to take sides or choose sides or give advice or?
Yeah, you'll notice that I'm not in this book. It's not written with me in the first person. I initially tried to write it, saying this is what I'm doing here. This is, this is what I'm thinking or feeling, and it just honestly it wasn't good. And I think in large part that was because there just are so many bad books written by white people about India, I think. And I was really desperate not to write a patronizing, sort of like outsiders, I know it all about India, because I don't. And that's why I chose like a very particular focus just on 3 couples, because that's all I know. These people that I spend an enormous amount of time with, I'm under no illusions that I know everything about India. It's an incredibly diverse and complicated place that I'm still learning so much about every day. And so, yeah, I think that's why I took this very sharp focus on these 3 people that I felt like, okay, I could become an expert on these 3 marriages as much as possible, as is possible, and leave myself out of it. Like, I don't need to tell you about the ways Mumbai is changing when these couples can say for themselves the way that they see the city changing, and they see love changing the city, and sex and marriage and all these things. But certainly in the moment when I was there and Maya and Veer were having a big blow-up fight, and in my mind I thought like, well, geez, this is because Veer is home late again. It seems like it'd be so easy to just show up on time, that it was hard for me to not say anything, but I felt it was very important not to intervene as much as.
There are many dramatic scenes in the book. Some of them took place long before you met these people, and you managed to sort of put it together as if you were there. But out of the scenes that you did witness, which was the most dramatic or the most moving for you?
I think the most dramatic was the time in which I went out to dinner with Maya and her husband and her lover. And I think that was just really mind-blowing to me that this was happening, and I felt like I didn't know how to even really process that, and it took me a long time to just hear from Maya and Veer and Subal about that. But in terms of the most moving, I don't know that. I think in part it was when I heard that Ashok and Prabhati were finally pregnant. But I think it was also, I think about one time that Veer and I were in the car, and he was also incredibly hard nut to crack, and I didn't understand, like, why can't you just show up for Maya? Like, she needs you, why can't you be here? And and I went on a 5-hour drive with him to his factory, and it started monsooning, and so it was an even longer drive. And so we were stuck in the car together, which as a reporter I was very excited about, because I was like, okay, we can talk. Like maybe he'll talk to me about these things that I'm wondering. And he explained to me that he had just experienced so much loss in his life, with the death of his mother and with the loss of the woman he really loved, that he found it really hard to love again. And I think, to me, that was a moment of like, oh, I get it. I get why you're acting this way. And that happened after 9 years of knowing him. And so, to me, that was also a lesson as a journalist in continuing to come back and show up, because you never know how people really feel about things, and it takes people an incredibly long time to open up and maybe explain like why it is they do the things they do.
Well, you mentioned in that Ashok and Parvati, do you want to read the section of that Ashok and Parvati?
The following month, when Parvati's sister and brother-in-law sent her the online profile, she thought little of it. Her family had been inundating her with online profiles, and she said no to every single one. Girls were being inundated across India because as the matrimonial ad section in the newspaper had gotten thinner, the old aunties who did the arranging had learned to navigate the web. The online marriage market was expected to triple in the next few years. Bharat Matrimony, the site Parvati was on, had recently run an ad in which a girl came home to be told by her mother that a boy was waiting in her bedroom, scandal, only to reveal that a boy's online profile was open on her computer screen. But although Parvati was lonely, the loneliest she had ever been, she wasn't interested in any of the profiles. None of them compared to Joseph. No, 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 she thought now, as she sat in her room at home, looking at the profile open on her laptop screen. It belonged to another Tamil Brahmin who, though he'd grown up partly in Trivandrum, now lived in Mumbai. He had a boyish face and a natural look. He looked like an average Tamram, like, in fact, her father. He is not looking good, she thought. I'm never going to say yes to this guy. The next day, her father brought her several engineers' profiles. Boring men who'd ensure her life would be tedious and small. Parvati saw he was going to force a marriage to one of these men soon, and she'd be powerless to stop him. That night, she revisited the profile her sister and brother-in-law had sent. The boy still looked like her father. She moved on to his stats. From her parents' perspective, a weak prospect. This made her look more closely. Weak point number 1, a master's in English, not an engineer, lawyer, or doctor. Weak point number 2, height 5 feet 10. In Parvati's family, short. She was almost as tall. Weak point 3, age 33. Too old. Parvati was just 26. She saw this was the kind of boy who might upset her parents, and she felt a flush of excitement at the prospect. As she scrolled farther down the page, she noticed extra text at the bottom, a personal note he had written for the girl, not for her family. I would give a free hand to my partner and expect the same from her. She paused. She liked the sound of this. He didn't seem like the kind of boy who would keep tabs on her at every moment. The next day, trying to keep her voice casual, Parvati told her sister and brother-in-law, "This seems like an okay profile." It was one of the first signs of interest she had shown. And so the wheels of marriage were set quickly into motion. Her brother-in-law informed her father, who, despite Ashok's age and height and occupation, took their horoscopes to an astrologer. Parvati accepted this news passively. She didn't expect the match to move forward. Out of the dozens of boys her parents and sister put before her, there had been only a few matches because of her bad stars. And, despite her recurring dreams about snakes, she did not believe any amount of pujas to the snake gods would fix that. Improbably, Parvati and Ashok's stars matched.
I think that's a really nice place to end. Do we have time for Q&A?
Yes, we have a couple questions. May I take one next? Questions?
Hi, I'm Meenakshi. Love and marriage is definitely a topic which I think interests everybody. I'm particularly interested in whether you had a chance to explore infidelity and things which perhaps in a kind of very patriarchal setup are not taken as seriously as any serious marriage would take it. Did you have any such experiences during your interactions?
Yeah, I think over the time I was reporting this book, I realized it was as much a book about women as it was about marriage and about the women in these marriages trying in a deeply patriarchal society to live the lives they wanted to lead. And I think when Maya first told me she was having an affair, my initial reaction was negative. My dad had affairs and I had a negative perception of them. And then I soon realized that the reason she was having an affair is because her marriage was so desperately not giving her what she needed. And over time, I myself, and I think as I was writing it, realized like how important it was for her to be able to find. Because she wasn't getting it from her marriage, she went elsewhere for it. And I think it's really important to look at how people are exploring their sexual lives. And I was recently asked to write a piece about pornography consumption in India, which is now, I think, the second highest in the world, and it's growing particularly among women. And obviously these are things we don't talk about as much, perhaps they're comfortable, but I think it's important to explore why.
One last question, please. One more question.
Yeah, I wanted to know how you end the book. Those three stories are really very nice. I wanted to know whether all these stories are loosely connected, or in a sense you just allow these stories to go on, or is there something tied? Do you have an ending, a common ending to all the three?
Can't tell you the endings, you'll have to read it to find out. Yes, but the couples are intertwined in as much as that they're living in Bombay at the same times and experiencing much of the same things.
Thank you very much for that outstanding session. Please buy the book. The book is available outside.